I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. For people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a . And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. One of the most fascinating aspects of hosting this program is getting this up close and personal seat to hear some truly inspirational stories about how some careers take shape. Well, in today's episode, you're about to hear from a guest who grew up in the UK thinking he'd end up being a politician, but instead found his professional calling taking him around the globe before settling in as a principal of an international school in Mexico. You'll hear all about how this unfolded, including peeks into the work itself, as far as rewards, challenges, and tips for others who might be intrigued by the idea of a career in education and global adventure. Now, all this is coming your way, so stick around. But first up, let me fill you in on a few more details of our esteemed guest. Jack Little is the school principal at Winpenny School in Mexico City, a British international school catering for learners from age 4 to 18. He's a dual British and Mexican national, fully bilingual in English and Spanish, with over 15 years of experience in teaching and leading schools in the UK, Mexico, Spain, and Colombia. Now, Jack holds 2 master's degrees and a postgraduate diploma in school leadership and is currently completing a doctorate in administration, focusing his studies on the impact of cultural organization on innovation in Mexican public universities. As an aside, Jack has published 2 collections of poetry titled Elsewhere and Slow Leaving. So with all this noted, really excited to welcome you to my conversation with Jack Little. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Jack?
I'm great, Christopher. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really looking forward to this conversation. I myself am based within education and also have been doing this internationally for quite some time. And we share something in common there with you being based in Mexico and having, experiences not only there, but a lot of other countries as well. So I'm really quite keen to get into this conversation today. With all of that in mind, I do have the first segment lined up for us. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my listeners know, it's a segment where I read off a definition of something related to the guest. Surprise, surprise, I have you down here for school principal. So let me just read that off and then you can comment. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely, yes. Please go ahead.
Okay, so here we go. School principal. A headmaster, headmistress, head teacher, school administrator, principal, or school director, sometimes another title is used, is the staff member of a school with the greatest responsibility for the management of the school. While some head teachers still do some teaching themselves, in most larger schools, most of their duties are managerial or pastoral. Their duties often include disciplining misbehaving students and helping to organize school-sponsored activities, and teachers report to them. Very, very general look at it. I'm sure you're going to have some comments and thoughts, but what would you say to that first off?
Well, I think certainly my role encompasses all of those elements. But what surprised me from that definition is the word learning doesn't appear. And what I see is the key role of a headmaster or director of academia is to ensure that the students have the very, very best opportunity to learn. What that means is training teachers, it means ensuring that there's the correct materials for the students, it means selecting the right curricula. And that's why I'm in this job, to ensure that students have the very best opportunities to learn. Certainly, you mentioned the pastoral element, and I think it is the role of the headmaster to set that vision for what we want the culture of the school to be like, for it to be a place with high expectations and a place of high levels of support. That's my motto as a headmaster. with the intention that the members of the school community are kind to each other, respectful to each other. And we have this common vision and goal to have the very best learning that can take place within the school.
Yeah, well, I think you should be updating that Wikipedia definition there, Jack. It does strike me as well that word that's a keen observation that learning is completely outside of it. It's a glaring omission at the very least, I would say. And yeah. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And the second point that you raised too, I think, is an interesting one. Obviously, like when we consider education, you think about like the actual knowledge that is being imbued, that's being taught, and students are taking on. But there's so much more to it than that. It's the culture that's taking place or is building around within a school system, and some of the values that that school believes in and wants students to adopt ultimately. So yeah, I like that. Maybe we could learn a little bit more about your background. Certainly off the top, I did mention a little bit about you and some of the things that you've been involved in, but maybe you could share a little bit more for us.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Well, I'm originally from the UK. I moved to Latin America 15 years ago. Something that I didn't mention in my bio was that I've actually represented Mexico in cricket, the second most popular sport in the world by numbers of people who play it, mostly people from
Yeah,
India. But that is
yeah.
a very proud moment for me.
That
Yeah,
should be in the
no,
bio. My 2 cents.
thank you, thank you.
That's pretty
No,
cool.
I dreamed of being a professional football player or soccer player, but what I made it to was to play international cricket for Mexico in Central America,
Wow.
which made me very proud. I,
Yeah.
I, I believe that in this type of role where it's a high level of stress, participating in sports and looking after one's mental health is extremely important. So I run a lot. I've completed 5 marathons very, very slowly. I think in the last marathon that I ran, a gentleman probably about 70 years old passed me in the final kilometers, and I thought, good for you. But I still feel proud. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and a few other things like things that I'm working on at the minute, not exactly in my school, but related to education. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be presenting at a conference, an international conference for teachers, where I'm going to be training teachers in how to set up a classroom with a learning focus, with dynamics that again focused on learning, which I'm very excited about. And I'm also going to be traveling to Peru in 2 months' time to deliver training for primary school teachers. I think what I'd love to share with you is that even now I'm an administrator and I don't actually deliver classes. In my heart, I'm still a primary school teacher for 9 and 10-year-olds, and that's where my passion is. And I've never lost that need for connection with the students and that desire to put, again, learning at the forefront of everything.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think that's probably one of the key elements of being an educator is no matter where you move throughout your career within that profession, as you mentioned, becoming an administrator, the people that succeed, I think, are maybe have some degree of fulfillment during the experience itself, and perhaps at the end is if you can keep that connection strong with the students themselves and trying to understand their situation and what they're going through and what you want to be educating them with, or how you want to be doing that. I think that's such a key point. I'm glad you brought that up. I also understand really quickly, and this is a bit off topic, that you have a side project as well in terms of like poetry and different projects. Maybe was it a book that you published there, or you have a website as well?
When I first moved to Mexico 15 years ago, I moved away from my mum, my dad, my brothers. My mum is a poet. She teaches at the university and she's published many books. And I thought, I'm going to start writing some poems to connect with my mum and maybe start publishing them. So I set up an online poetry magazine and a publishing company. So we've published over 20 books now of Mexican, either
Wow.
contemporary poets, or one was Nezahualcóyotl, a famous architect and poet from Mexico, writing in Nahuatl. And we translated that into English and Spanish. And these books are free and available for anybody to read through my publishing company, the Offie Press. The readership is probably about 300 or 400 each edition or each book that comes out. But it brings me so much joy to be able to give something to the world. It doesn't matter so much how many people read it or how successful it is, by creating something that goes out there and translating and working with the team. There's an amazing translator, Don Cellini, in the United States, and Agnes Martin, who I work with in Hungary. And we publish the magazine and these books. And then, as well as I've published two of my own poetry books, one called
Wow.
Elsewhere and Slow Leaving. And they're all about being in a space between my childhood in the northeast of England and being in Mexico, being between places, being between times. It's got quite a nostalgic feel to it. But most recently, I've been reflecting. I wrote a poem maybe 10 years ago that I published for my friend Don Cellini. And it was the image of myself sitting at a window and imagining visiting all of these cities around Latin America. And it's really funny that, or it's strange at the moment that these opportunities are coming up to go to Peru, to go to Central America, to be in Colombia. It's like that poem manifested into many things that are happening right now. So yeah, writing poetry is a big passion of mine. I've got my administrator's hat where I'm thinking about the money, I'm thinking about how to be cost effective, and then I still hold in my heart that creative passion and wanting to share words and moments with people as we're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I bring that up too, aside from like giving an opportunity to speak about this and hopefully, get more people interested in it as well, is the fact that I think it speaks to this point of like having a lot of different interests, and how important that can be for people. Like, I think it's one thing to sink yourself into a career, and that's certainly an important thing, especially if you have a passion behind it, it's going to help. But if you're only living within that world, that's going to be to your detriment and ultimately to your career as well. So I think like, having these other interests, especially ones that allow you to have this creative outlet that allow you to express yourself and your feelings in so many different ways, that I think can play, a role in having this fulfilled life that certainly we're all after. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that. Maybe we could step into another segment here and returning to you and your career itself. A day in the life, and I think like a lot of people probably have this idea of what a principal's, work would entail. I think just based off of shared experiences, people going through the education system and whatnot. But all the same, I think what adds an interesting wrinkle to all of this is the fact that you're doing it internationally. Like, what would a day look like for you at the moment? Maybe you could speak to that point.
Of course, in Mexico, the day starts quite early. We have to be at school at 7 o'clock. What I always try to do at the beginning of the day, if I don't have other meetings, is welcome students as they're coming into the school, off the bus, or walking up the ramp. I believe that that's absolutely essential for these students to feel they're in their safe place, they're in their happy place in the school. Every day is different, really, but I could say I might meet with the senior leadership team from the school, our head of kinder, head of primary, head of secondary. The things that we've been discussing most recently are how to improve on our sustainability projects, where most recently we've gathered almost 600 kilograms of materials over the last month for recycling. And that's something that's really brought the community together with student volunteers and parent volunteers. I work as an extended essay supervisor, so I'm working with our older students and supervising their business-focused essays. My student, she's writing about the impact of different cities around the world hosting Formula One and how that impacts on the culture and in particular, the economy of the city. What I always try to do in between being in my office and writing up policies and typing up minutes is to make sure that I get out of the office and I'm walking around the school, perhaps on learning walks, and I'm looking for things to celebrate. I want to see teachers engaging with students. I want to see dynamic learning environments. I want to see students who are proud and happy to be there. And when there is a challenge, that our teachers are working with the students to resolve the conflict, helping the students to be more assertive. And what I try to do every day is find things that I can celebrate with our teachers. Yeah, so that would be a day, but I would say it's never the same. There's always meetings happening. There's always challenges. Mexico City's in an earthquake zone, so we have regular practice evacuations and drills, which is very different to the UK, of course. And there are many considerations that I think are very similar to working in schools in the UK. However, as you mentioned, being in this other culture in Mexico City, there are certainly different challenges which make it, I think, all the more exciting.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot to unpack there, certainly. And I think the busyness of it all stands out for a lot of people. Again, there's a surface level understanding that a lot of people have, but then also, too, like you add on these cultural elements to it on top of all of that and things that people just wouldn't expect necessarily. There's a lot going on. And, and trying to find that balance. And again, within education, there's a lot of unexpected moments, whether it's an
Yes.
interaction with the student, with teachers themselves, or some of the challenges that they might be facing in the classroom, outside the classroom. There's a lot there. So I can appreciate all of that. Maybe we could extend this conversation a little bit more as far as like getting into your background and pathways. Like, how did you actually make your way to the school that you're at right now? And then also like some of the other experiences, I think Spain, Colombia, there's some of your other stops along the way. Like what took you out of the UK and into these other realms?
I'm going to go back. Well, I'll try to be concise with my information, but my first degree was in politics in the northeast of England, and it was always
Yeah.
my dream to become a politician. I worked for various politicians. I had the opportunity to meet a couple of prime ministers, just very passive in a very passing way. It was at the end of university when I started working for a trade union, working to support young workers with workers' rights. And I was given the opportunity to travel to Cuba. My trade union paid for me to go on a youth visit to Cuba, where I spent 2 weeks working on a farm and visiting different areas there. And there I met people from all over the world, but particularly in Latin America. At that time, I went back to my hometown. It was not as easy to get a job in politics as I thought, a formal job after graduating. So my first job in teaching was as a learning support teacher. So I worked with students in a secondary school with learning difficulties and specific challenges that I supported them with. And one of the people that I met on that trip to Cuba invited me to come to Mexico. And I thought, oh, I don't know anything about Mexico. I've met a few Mexican people who have been very kind and lovely. I think there's
Yeah.
sunshine there. I think there's football, soccer there. I'm going to go and see how it works out. And my first few months in Mexico, I spent around a year working as an editor for textbooks. I taught business English to businessmen. I had a whole variety of jobs, and it was through my passion for cricket that I got into working in a school. I volunteered as a cricket coach to work with primary school children.
Really quickly, sorry to interrupt. I mean, did you have language skills at this point that were allowing you to do any of this, or were you just kind of coming in and
I could not speak any Spanish when I first arrived. I spent 10
there you
years
go?
learning French at school, and I never learned anything. I did badly in my scores, and I always thought I'm not a language person. Coming to Mexico, in that first year, I met the lady who's now my wife. We've been married now for 13 years. And with that motivation of love, I think anyone can learn any language. But she helped me with my Spanish. And one thing that I did that I think is quite different to other British teachers or foreign teachers who come to Mexico and other countries is quite often they look for other Brits or other people from their nation. But I made a specific effort to really immerse myself in Mexican culture, which was fabulous. I picked up Spanish. It took probably 2 years to do. I hear that people pick up languages in a few months. It took me 2 years. But, but I speak Spanish completely fluently now, and I write in Spanish as well. But yeah, I think back to 15 years ago when I first arrived here and I didn't speak a word. I didn't get a haircut for about 6 months because I was terrified of going to the barber shop and not knowing how to express myself. So I had this really long hair. But getting into teaching here was again, it was through cricket. It was wanting to give
Yeah.
something to the kids. So I was coaching cricket with the young kids. And then from there, I was a cover teacher for a few years. What I've always searched for is more responsibility and to be able to make more of an impact on more people's lives. So I did my time as a teacher. I spent many years as a primary school teacher, and all of that time trying to perfect my practice to give the very, very best for the students. After that, I worked as a deputy head here in Mexico City before moving to Colombia, where I spent 2 years in a very high performing school in Colombia. What was very interesting for me, I thought in Colombia would be very similar to Mexico. The Spanish is quite similar. We listen to very similar music. And there was such a cultural difference that I wish that I'd done a bit more research before I'd made that made that change. Both Latin American countries with a lot of similarities. But I guess it would be the same as somebody coming to Europe and thinking that Germany would be very similar to England. There's some similarities, but
Right.
they've got their own cultures. Since returning from Colombia 2 years ago, this is my second year now with this whole school responsibility. And I feel very grateful to have this opportunity to have the role that I have. I'm 38 years old, so that's I think younger than what traditionally whole school headmasters are in terms of age.
Yeah.
But what I want to bring to this role is this enthusiasm that I have, this passion, this understanding about cultural differences and knowing how to communicate with people from different cultures to get the very best for the students and the community. So that's a little bit about my pathway to where I'm at now. I had a year in Spain as well, where I worked as a teacher. Our plan was to stay in Spain, but that was the year my wife got pregnant. And then that's what life does. And we thought, okay, we need to either
Exactly.
go back to England or come to Mexico. But I love the culture in these Spanish speaking countries. In England, well, we're very polite to each other, I would say, without saying anything else. But here in Latin America, what really called my attention is music everywhere. It's easy to make friends, it's easy to connect with people. And there are also, of course, significant challenges with living on the other side of the world with cultural differences. But I love the warmth and the vibrancy of Mexico
Yeah.
City and Bogota and Mallorca, where I've lived previously as well.
As I was listening to you explain all of this, like the word that kept coming in to my mind was like how inspirational like that journey is to somebody who's maybe like listening to this program right now and is considering like, well, they would maybe like to get into education or maybe perhaps some other industry, but they want to do it internationally. And to me, like the way you went about it, at least, is like you had these goals or ideas, but then also you sort of like fell into opportunities, here and there, and then just continually worked at, upskilling yourself from, say, the language standpoint, but then also too, like professionally speaking as well, always taking on new responsibilities, with this ultimate goal of trying to create impact. And I think that speaks to this point of like just little by little, gradually, like these opportunities will present themselves if you keep putting yourself out there. And again, I think like the word that comes to mind for me is inspirational. There's a bit of inspiration in all of that, I think. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think it's really, quite helpful to, again, listeners of this program. Leads me
Thank
into
you.
this other question here, like returning to you and your professional development. Like when I was going back through your background and researching for this talk and going over to LinkedIn, certainly like I saw a master's of education and, I did notice a few other acronyms attached to your profile there. So what I'm driving at here is I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the technical knowledge, qualifications and skills that you've been developing along this way that have, ultimately played a role in you finding this level of success within your career.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think the most impactful training that I did was my formal teaching qualification, where I spent a year being mentored, having to submit evidence of impact in learning. And that, I think, was the most impactful training that I had to have that structure as a teacher and that vision that it's not just about learning, but it's the organization, it's about communication, all of these transferable skills that are necessary for teaching, but I think in other areas as well. My master's in education, I studied that with a focus on international teaching as well. It took 5 years to complete that, little by little, as you said. Constant effort is what leads to success, is that constancy. And as my final project for that master's degree, I wrote, my intention was to write a thesis about what the perfect teacher looks like, how to have that most impact. I did all of the research, and what I found out was that doesn't exist. There's not a golden bullet that makes you a good teacher. It's about being adaptable to every student that you have, being adaptable to your cultural context. Of course, having that pedagogical studies behind it, but what really it's knowing the context that you're in and how to have the best impact on the students within that context. Most recently, I studied an EMBA online with Quantic University, a US university, which is really exciting because they use a lot of artificial intelligence in terms of the structure of their studies. And that was a really fascinating year and a half in terms of working with colleagues in projects online, but also doing most of my learning through an artificial intelligence interface at the same time. What pushed me to do that was this idea that I really want to be an administrator. And I know having the passion and having the pedagogical knowledge is absolutely essential for the role, but also it requires that element of being an administrator. How do you decide where do we put the money? Where's the money going to have the most impact? What are the correct hiring processes to get the very best teachers in the team? Since then, I took the National Professional Qualification for Headship, which is a postgraduate level study from the UK government, which prepares people to become headmasters or principals, as you may say. And what I loved about that is it's all research-based. It's about how do we implement cultural change in a school? How do we focus on learning? And all of it is based on research that's been carried out in schools. Something that was absolutely amazing, thinking about connection, was that some of the case studies that I was reading while I was here in Mexico City and Colombia were from the very next village in the northeast of England of a school where some of my friends went to when I was a child.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, oh wow, this it sent a little shiver up my spine, these
Yeah.
strange connections. And most recently, I'm studying my doctorate in administration in Spanish. It's the first formal studies that I've taken in Spanish. And my focus is on organizational culture in public universities and how that impacts on innovation. What really makes me excited about it is that I think with my doctoral thesis and research, again, hopefully I'll be able to make a tiny grain of impact in perhaps somebody in these public universities might read it and use some of the models that I'm working with to make sure that the organizational culture and the work climate are the most beneficial for innovation that they can be. You mentioned earlier about not just putting all of your eggs in one basket, you could say. And I think for me in my role, I have my role as the headmaster where it's very practical. It's making constant decisions every moment. But then to jump into this theoretical world where I'm constructing my thesis and looking at creating my methodologies and how I'm going to approach the organizational culture with different models, it's like going into a different world. Nobody may ever read my thesis, but it's that feeling of I could be doing something important to add one little grain of knowledge to the body of knowledge that we have as humans, right?
Absolutely. And also, too, I'm sure, like, just in the process of researching and really deeply considering and thinking about a lot of these things, you're creating these new learning touch points for yourself. Certainly others as well that would encounter this content later on. But I'm sure it's leading to new realizations or new ideas and thoughts that can direct your pathway forward in a lot of different ways, too. So, again, returning to this point of like what's driving you, like what I was picking up here, listening to this is impact, impact, impact. And, ultimately you have these goals, I'm assuming, of what you want to accomplish within your school as an administrator, as, a head teacher. And these programs or things that you're sinking yourself into are vehicles for you ultimately achieving some of these goals. Now, from the perspective of a listener who's maybe younger, who's like entertaining this idea of maybe getting into education internationally, this might sound a little bit intimidating, like, oh my gosh, like I haven't considered any of this. How can I, what can I do here? And I'm guessing here, like, at least for you, all of this was, again, gradual. You might have had this overarching goal of things that you wanted to do ultimately, but you didn't have like the map to achieve all of this right away. Like, this has been a gradual process for you. Is that a correct assumption I'm making here?
Absolutely. I think there's been times I've not known what I've wanted to do, and sometimes I still feel like that now. As a perhaps middle-aged professional, I still think, oh, there's a big world out there of things that could come. Yes, absolutely. Even when I went to university to study politics, I didn't know what I wanted to study. I applied for 6 different universities, one for politics, one for history, one university I applied for African studies with Swahili. And I'm a big
Oh, wow.
believer in we have to put in the effort and the work. But a lot of things we can't control ourselves. We just have to be open to what's out there. I think there's a lot of fear sometimes with all of us about if we step off the beaten path, what could happen? What will people think of me? What if it doesn't work out? And I was blessed with my dad in particular, who always encouraged me to take risks, measured risks. But in terms of coming to Mexico and traveling or applying for that job that's just out of reach and could be a little bit crazy or a little bit dangerous or a little bit whatever, he pushed me to say anything's possible. But you do your work, you do your effort, something good's going to come out of it. But it's not always what you think it can be. And sometimes in life, what I've found is that sometimes the worst moments where you think this isn't how I planned it, this isn't the job that I wanted, this isn't the place where I expected to be, the very, very best things come from those moments. So I think if there's any advice, it would be to be resilient when those challenges come up and be open to new things. And there might be things that you've never, ever considered before in your life. And there might be moments where you feel that this wasn't what I expected. But if you feel in your heart that this decision that I'm making is right for me in this moment, I'm a firm believer that good things will come from it if you put in the effort as well.
Yeah, beautifully put. I love that. It's powerful. I think that can like free up a lot of people as far as like maybe pursuing something that might be in the back of their mind, but they have these feelings that you'd mentioned, like what are others going to think of me, or a certain fear, rational or irrational at times. I think that's important to have those reminders now and then. So I appreciate that. This other question too, as far as like getting back to the role and responsibility of what you're currently engaged in right now, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges, but then conversely, some of the biggest rewards?
Okay, I think in terms of challenges is that your mind never stops with working in a school, and I'm sure in other professions as well. But the school day ends in the afternoon, but my mind is always thinking about how am I going to work on this conversation with this leader or teacher tomorrow? What is the specific language? I try to be very precise in the language that I use to get across the exact point that I want to make. I'm generally pretty good at it, but sometimes it doesn't happen. I think that's the biggest challenge, that feeling of always being on, thinking about what's coming tomorrow, how are we going to get the best for the school, how are we going to get the best for the students. Now, I have developed the skill of being a bit more balanced, and at a certain time of night, I switch off my computer and I am able to switch my mind off. And I would say that's the same in the holidays as well. Of course, as teachers, we get long holidays. But as an administrator even as a teacher, I would spend a lot of those days planning, preparing, making everything ready for the first day. They're not challenges that I dislike. It's just the way of the job. I think for me, the rewards of having become a teacher and administrator is this amazing opportunity to be in Mexico, to have gone to Colombia, to have been in Spain. That is just incredible to think that soon or in a few years that an opportunity could come up where we could be on the other side of the world. That's very exciting. One thing that I haven't mentioned, but that I do appreciate in the role is being a respected member of the community. As a headmaster at a respected school here in the city, if I take my son ice skating or we go swimming, quite often we bump into students from the school. And we bump into the parents and they shake my hand and they say, "Hello, Mr. Jack." And that's something that I value a lot, of being somebody in the community who is trying their best to make a positive contribution as well. And as I mentioned, with having a son, role brings, in many cases, a scholarship for him to study at these high-quality schools, that if I wasn't working as an administrator, I wouldn't be able to have access to these great opportunities for him. And finally, well, having the holidays as well, even though I work in the holidays and I think about school in the holidays, having that golden time to spend with my wife and son, it really is a great career choice for thinking about having a family, about being able to go on trips at the same time as your son or daughter on holiday when your wife is available as well. And that's something that I value very much, having those really, really intense months of studying and working, but then certainly 2 or 3 weeks of very quality time with my wife and son, where we just have an incredible time.
I think all of those points probably resonate, like you can imagine, you can see yourself perhaps if you have this idea or vision of getting an education, like some of the things that you just sort of spelled out there, will probably hit a lot of people, both the challenges and the potential rewards as well of it all. And on a deeper level, I'm assuming as well here that like, certainly education itself, you're delivering impact to learners and people can understand like the value in that, obviously. But then also too, as an educator yourself, what a career with an education means to you as a person, like what you are getting out of it as well. And I think that's something that, maybe people can envision a little bit, but maybe you could share some of your thoughts on that. Like what are you taking away from this experience of this deep and rich career within education? What are you getting out of all of this?
Connection, having connections with people, like-minded people. I think generally teachers, 99% of teachers want the best for the students and they want to make this positive effort. You're in this ambience with other people with a similar mindset. If we want to make an impact, we want to do good for society. It's a profession that, compared to working on Wall Street or in corporate jobs, it doesn't pay as well, but it allows you to have a comfortable life. So you're giving up perhaps money or a certain amount of wealth, but what you're gaining is this wealth of connections with all of these people who you meet around the world. There's teachers who I've met here in Mexico, and I've come across them later on in Venezuela. I've met them and bumped into them in other parts of the world. And that's it brings you together, I think. The world's a small place, and the world of British international schools is a small place as well. And you meet all of these incredible people who are wanting to do good. I've bumped into my ex-students before all over the world as well. I've bumped into an ex-student in London, and I said, Raphael! And this student, by then he was about 18, so at the peak of his teenage years. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Jack, what are you doing here in London?" I said, "Oh, but are you not excited about this coincidence that we've bumped into each other on the other side of the world?" And I've had much more emotional connections where I've bumped into teachers and
Yeah.
I've heard, "Mr. Jack!" in Chihuahua, in the north of Mexico, and all over the place. And my wife's family, they're from here in Mexico City. And when they hear that, when they hear Mr. Jack, here we go again. We never bump into anyone that we know, but you seem to have these connections with people all over. And that, I think, is wealth that's worth much more than money. Being an administrator and a teacher, you can be very comfortable. Perhaps a career in politics or working in the corporate world, there would have been Mercedes and BMWs and other things. But honestly, that wealth of those connections, and when you hear that, "Oh, Mr. Jack," that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, as somebody who spent some time in education as well, primarily within Japan, one of the things that they do here, I don't know if you do this within Mexico or some other places that you've been, but the graduating students, at least within Japan in high schools, they're given the option basically of writing these little messages or notes of gratitude or thanks to teachers that, had some sort of impact on their life, or they want to express something to them. So at the end of each year for the graduating class, if you're lucky enough to be teaching any of those students, oftentimes you'll get a stack of letters from the students, and they'll be expressing a lot of their gratitude. And for me, as somebody who's like been within education, I've often thought like these are the moments, certainly like in the moment when you're reading these letters, they're moving. They really truly are moving. But then also too, I can envision myself one day when I am out of this world completely, and I'm maybe retired and not working. Those are the types of things that you're going to return to, and you're going to get a lot of joy and gratitude in going back and reading them again later on, because like at that point probably in your life you're reflecting on a lot of different things, and things like purpose and meaning and all of those things. Certainly maybe in the moment you are doing that now too, but I think later on in life that's just a natural progression that a lot of people sort of move towards. And I think within education you get ample opportunities to create these buckets full of moments and shared experiences that they're going to be nice, I think, ultimately for somebody who chooses that profession or that way of life. So yeah, is there anything like that, at least within within Mexico?
Well, something that we have done in our graduation ceremonies here have been for our students to make origami birds with messages on for teachers. That's something that I know our teachers treasure always. They do
Yeah.
keep them. They keep them for a long time. And I've even found notes myself from my teaching years. I'd spent time in Thailand a few months while I was at university on a placement. And something that stood out for me there was the absolute utmost respect that people in Thailand or Thai culture has for teachers. And I came back with my drawings and notes, and I still have them now. That was 16 years ago. And
There
I
you
still
go.
have them
Yeah.
now, and I occasionally take them out and I have a look and think, oh, that was a good time. And those kids will remember
Yeah.
that strange Englishman who went to their little village in Thailand to teach them English.
There you are. And maybe we could shift on over here into another segment. And this is one, personally, is a favorite of mine. And I know for a lot of listeners too, a water cooler story segment. And here I'm just after a story of something that holds meaning to you within your career. I'd love to hear what you have for us today, Jack.
I'm going to go back again to connection and one of my first students when I arrived here in Mexico and I started coaching cricket. It was a student called Emiliano, and I remember this young boy is very smart, he's quite shy, and I saw myself in him a little bit from when I was his age. So over the coming years, I coached cricket with him. I became his teacher in the same school later on when I finally graduated to become a teacher by the time he was 12. And then actually my wife started tutoring Emiliano in secondary school. She's also a teacher. Many years passed, we didn't see him for a while. And then about 3 years ago, he recently asked me and my wife to help him with his university applications and letters. So we helped him with that process, and he's currently in New York at the minute, about to finish his third year of university. He's taller than me now. He's a big, muscly guy. He's somebody that I look up to. And occasionally we see his mum and dad who live around the corner from my wife's family home. And that really is a symbol of being in this job, of seeing this young person who I could see elements of myself in, with this person with so much potential, growing to be a really confident person, growing into become a young man who wants to make his impact in the world. And now just about to graduate from university. Now I feel quite old thinking of when I worked with Emiliano before and he was a little boy, and now he's this big muscly fella. But that really, I think that story or that anecdote just is why I'm a teacher, why I work in education, to see this guy confident, happy, sure of himself. He had many teachers, he has amazing parents, all of these people who contributed. He was a great kid to begin with. But again, to have contributed my little grain of sand to him to becoming what he is today and still having that connection with him is really powerful.
Yeah, that's it. That's probably like the reason that a lot of people get into education is for that. Is creating, again, we've used this word so many times in this conversation, is impact, ultimately, right? You're helping to shape and shift somebody's life and life trajectory in hopefully a lot of positive ways. And I think that story speaks to that point there. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't believe we're blowing, through it at this pace here. But I do want to kind of close things out with any advice that you'd be able to give somebody who's maybe interested in a career within education, and then also too maybe like doing it internationally. What advice would you be able to give to somebody who has those types of aspirations?
To work with young people, particularly students in primary school, I think it's okay to try it if you're not sure. But if it's a career that you want to stay in for the medium to long term, you owe it to yourself and to those young people for it to be something that you want to be doing for the right reasons. There are all these amazing benefits of teaching internationally, like being able to travel, being able to go to the beach at the weekend, but which are all valid and things that we enjoy. But I think if you're not a person who wants to make that benefit or support the students, but you're there for the trip or for the money, I would strongly recommend that you reconsider that, because I don't think it's fair to yourself or to the young people that you're with. I think if you decide to go into teaching formally, taking that formal teaching qualification or certificate is absolutely essential, because it gives you those bases for doing a really good job as a teacher in terms of assessment, in terms of grouping, in terms of pedagogical strategies for teaching, which I think there are people in this world who are naturally good teachers or naturally have an affinity with working with young people. But to really do a good job, you need that passion, but you also need the knowledge and skills as well. Now, thinking about teaching internationally, research where you're going a little bit, because my experience in Colombia was amazing, but I had a culture shock that I think I could have avoided or reduced by researching beforehand more about the culture. And you never know, you might end up somewhere in the world that it feels like as much as home as where you were born. And that's how I feel about Mexico at the moment. So decide if you want to do it for the right reasons, helping the kids, do the training that you need to do, be resilient when the challenges come up, and there's always going to be challenges in life and in every career. And four, I think, is just being open. You might have your plans and think where you're going and know what's going to happen for the next few years, but just be open to changes and adaptable.
There it is. This might be a nice opportunity to put a bow on this conversation, Jack. I mean, I've really, enjoyed it from start to finish. And I think listeners are really going to be able to glean a lot from it. So I can't thank you enough for all of your time today.
No, I appreciate it, Christopher. It's amazing to have this opportunity to reflect on the last few years and where I'm going. And hopefully the listeners will be able to take something away from our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Jack and his work, you can do so via LinkedIn. And for reference, I will have a link for that in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share to show further support. You can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And lastly, as I mentioned at the top, I do have that YouTube channel which hosts some highlights from these conversations. So if you do make it over there, I would love a like, a comment, or subscribe. All of that stuff helps a ton. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as a, where you could literally be one listen away from finding your dream job. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host, and until next time, don't settle for less. Find the career you were born for.